afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our webinar today, Fuel for Thought, Hydrogen and Low Energy Technologies for a Sustainable Energy Future, presented by SGInnovate in support of Deep Tech for Good. Now, my name is Brian, and for those of you who don't know about us, we are a government-owned organization in Singapore that invests in and helps build deep tech startups, talent, and communities. At SGInnovate, our work involves connecting with the global deep tech ecosystem, working with entrepreneurial scientists to bring their innovative research from lab to market, as well as developing deep tech talent. Today, we have a group of amazing speakers who will be sharing about the role that hydrogen technologies have to play in decarbonizing industries in Singapore and more. I would like to encourage our audience here today to share their thoughts on this topic and engage with our speakers by using the Q&A box below. And with no further ado, I will now pass the time to our moderator for today, Wei Ying. Wei Ying, please.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Hui Ying from the venture investing team of SGInnovate, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion on hydrogen and low carbon technologies for a sustainable energy future. It is becoming even more critical today than before for us to step up our decarbonization efforts, especially with the recent climate change report by IPCC released about a week ago. The report serves as an urgent call to action as it estimates that global temperature rise will hit 2 degrees Celsius before 2035 if no immediate, rapid, large-scale reduction of greenhouse gas emissions are taken. In this session, we hope to take a closer look at the role of hydrogen to decarbonize industries in Singapore, understand what are some of the opportunities and use cases, and discuss the barriers to deployment that we will need to overcome. We are very privileged to have 3 industry experts with us today for this panel discussion. Mr. Miguel Laburo, Vice President, Research and Development from the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association of Singapore, Mr. Dennis Wee, Head of Innovation from Keppel Data Centers, and Mr. Andre Lorenzo, CEO and co-founder of DBGas. To our audience here today, we hope to answer some of your questions along the way as we address the various topics related to the hydrogen economy. If you do have any burning questions that you would like to raise along this conversation, please feel free to post your questions here on the Q&A box, and we will try our best to answer them. Without further ado, let's jump right in for a quick round of introduction by all our panelists. Let me invite Dennis, followed by Andre and Miguel, to start us off by giving us a brief background about yourself, the organization you're from, and your role in your organization. Dennis, please.
Yes, a very good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us here today to speak. Yeah, my name is Dennis, and I head the innovation division of Keppel Data Centers Holdings. So my primary focus at this point in time is look at the ways in which you can build data centers of the future and address sustainability at the same time. So the challenge we face in our current industry is that as data centers, you know by now, consume a lot of power, all right? Data centers are operating in megawatts here in Singapore, and unfortunately, we have to very much rely on the grid for power, and we all know that the grid consume hydrocarbons. So with hydrocarbons comes CO2 emission. So we are very mindful of that, and this presents quite a significant challenge for us to know into ways to how we're going to mitigate this CO2 footprint. So moving forward, I think one of the options we are exploring and working very closely towards would be fuel cells, hydrogen, as a means of providing the green electrons needed for the data centers. All right.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I think it's my turn.
Yes,
my name is Andre Lorenzo. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DBGas, and we're a startup, seed stage, just closed our round to separate hydrogen using novel membranes. So they're basically filters. So we're kind of an infrastructure play, and we play in all across the board from green hydrogen to blue hydrogen to gray hydrogen. For those who don't know, we'll come back to that in a minute. Basically, it's just a filter to purify hydrogen in industrial processes, and it's useful all over the industry.
Thank you, Andre.
Good. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you, Singapore Innovate, for inviting us. My name is Miguel. I'm the VP of R&D VP in the HEFCAS, which is the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association of Singapore. Basically, this organization actually it was created, has a long history, but coming to what we do, we are actually here to create awareness and to support and to promote the hydrogen technologies and how we can introduce or bring the hydrogen technologies into Singapore. And we do that through different ways that I can explain later, but basically it's through support to the industry, networking, looking what they're looking for. We put them in contact, that creating synergies. We also have provide support for standards. We also provide support in trainings and in general, whatever is needed to make hydrogen one of the relevant elements to play this energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, gentlemen. Now, before we go into the depth of the discussion, which I'm sure many will be excited about, it will be helpful for us to first understand the basic chemistry. Why do we regard hydrogen as a clean fuel? Perhaps, Miguel, if you could enlighten us on this.
So I will go a little bit overview. I guess that there are many type of different attendees. So hydrogen is actually an element that it was the first time used in between the 16 and 1700s in the 17th century, but it was in the 18th century when it was actually included in the periodic table by Cavendish. Okay, the good thing or the most relevant how to say properties of this element is that it is the lightest in the whole periodic table, which makes it very, very light and helps for certain things like transportation. It's very abundant in the visual world that we have. Unfortunately, it's most of the time is part of a more complex compound, which means that needs to be split to have it as a single element, and that is something that is probably the major downside that hydrogen has. However, has the highest energy density among all the elements, which also provides an upside. So this element can also use in the industry and in the can be used in different applications. Can be as an energy vector, which basically provides energy, can be heat or can be electricity, but can also be used as a feedstock, in which case it's used part of a process, of a more complex process as a chemical material. Okay, so I believe that the reason why, and probably we will go now to that, is why hydrogen is probably one of the elements or the most relevant elements that will help to the energy transition is basically the high density and overall that is a clean element that when it's combined with oxygen generates electricity or energy, I would say, to be more precise, and water, pure water. So there is no any kind of pollutant. And probably that is one of the keys that we will talk now, but help to the decarbonization of Singapore.
That's helpful to understand, Miguel. Now, we understand for hydrogen technologies to be implemented successfully, it is important for the end-to-end supply chain and infrastructure to be in place. Now, let's talk a bit about the start of the supply chain, the sources of the production. We are aware today there are a few colors tagged to the sources of hydrogen. Maybe I can get Dennis to help us to shed some light on this. How do we understand or differentiate what are the different sources of hydrogen?
Okay. In fact, there's a huge spectrum of classification of hydrogen per se. Okay, I think it all boils down to only three, at least for me. Okay, basically start off with there's gray, blue, or green hydrogen. Okay, so typically for gray or blue hydrogen, it's being derived from hydrocarbons. All right, for gray hydrogen, for example, you subject natural gas or methane to a process called steam methane for reforming. All right, that's when you split the carbon and the hydrogen. All right, carbon is being evacuated to the atmosphere, and you capture the hydrogen for consumption. Right, so when that happens, when you evacuate carbon into the atmosphere, that will be termed as gray hydrogen. Okay, blue hydrogen comes about when you capture the CO2, and then you sequester it, you home it permanently so that it doesn't escape into the atmosphere and so forth. Then that hydrogen is termed as blue hydrogen. And then last but not least is our all-time favorite, which is the green hydrogen. So how do we derive green hydrogen? That's through a process called electrolysis, powered by renewable energy, be it from solar or wind. All right, and then you go through the electrolysis process where water is a key component to that. You split H2 and O. That's where you derive green hydrogen. All right. Once you get access to this hydrogen, it's in gaseous form. Then how can you sort of like say, for example, in countries like Australia, how then can you export this hydrogen out to places in Asia where there's huge demand for clean energy like green hydrogen? So one means, of course, is to liquefy the hydrogen, okay, to liquid hydrogen as a form of carrier for hydrogen. There's also another means, there are a couple of them out there, in fact. Ammonia is one option as well. And the third one, which is also being evaluated now very closely, is liquid organic hydrogen carrier. It's a third option that's widely being looked at this point in time. So from Kepler's perspective, we are very much into liquid hydrogen and ammonia at this point in time.
Thank you for your insights, Dennis. I think that's helpful for us to first get the basics right. And I think moving on, I would like to get, I think, our panelists' point of view in your respective areas of work. What are some of the key factors that are driving the interest and adoption of hydrogen as an alternative energy source? Maybe Dennis, since you spoke about Kepler looking at application for data centers, if you could help us to understand a bit more from your perspective. And then I think Andre and Miguel, you can share a bit more from your interactions with your customers, partners, various members on this.
Okay. For us, we are looking at hydrogen specifically for power production. So with green hydrogen, for example, right? And then, of course, you pass it through a hydrogen turbines or hydrogen power plant, so to say. So the electrons produced will be termed as green electrons, totally free of carbon. All right. This is what our clients are looking at. This is what Kepler is also very active in terms of the kind of possibility when we get access to green electrons to decarbonize the whole Kepler group and so forth in our course of business. So therefore, I think the green electrons is something that it's very critical to us. At this point in time, for Singapore, I think there are two means of getting green electrons. Of course, through renewable energy from neighboring countries. Okay, this one option, you pipe the subsea power cable to Singapore. You probably read about it in the papers. But of course, the other option, in terms of having the ability to generate these green electrons locally, all right, we need to get access to green hydrogen. Okay, so this explains why we are very, very active into this area. We're doing a lot of work. We are working very closely with a consortium of partners. We have made some announcement out there that we are working with very closely with the likes of Kawasaki Heavy Industry, all right, Mitsui OSK Line, Linde, and Royal Vopak to look into entire supply chain infrastructure for liquid hydrogen.
Right.
With the assumption that we are looking at working very closely with hydrogen producers in Australia, okay, and find the necessary missing links, okay, to bring in that liquid hydrogen from Australia once it's being produced to Singapore. You gasified it, and then it goes into the power plant for power generation. So the entire supply chain is being worked on at this point in time by Kepler.
Right. So I guess from Kepler's point of view, in terms of the interest is really to replace the power consumption from the grid. That's right.
This is this is the motivation behind it, and of course there are two key drivers for this. I think first and foremost, our clients' ambition, or even Kepler's together with Kepler's ambition to go green. Right. We are very mindful that data center, like I mentioned earlier, that we consume a lot of power. All right, and it's mind-boggling because customers are asking for, or clients are asking for more power, more space, more cooling, and then it's a vicious cycle. If we continue to provide this, then we will not meet our commitment to Paris Accord. Okay, this has to be addressed. Yeah, and then of course, on the other front, we are in the industry itself also face a bit of challenge now, especially now there's some kind of a moratorium going on, whereby the authorities are not facilitating any new DC build here in Singapore. So to do that, you need to have a solution, a green solution before an option will be offered to the industry to continue to build data centers. But we're very mindful this for clients. If they want to scale up, they need more space, more power. If we are not able to provide that in Singapore,
Right.
then they would definitely consider sites outside of Singapore.
Right. Thank you, Dennis. I think that's interesting to also get a view from you as to, what are the sources or potential sources of this green hydrogen could come from. Maybe Andre, can you also share with us a bit more from your interactions with some of your potential customers on adopting your technology, right? What drive some of these companies or corporates to look at using our technology and also use the use of hydrogen?
Yeah, going at a very high level, the fundamental use of hydrogen is driven by climate change, right? Like I think everybody's seen in the news that the world is on fire to some degree right now, and there's been two pretty damning reports this year from the International Energy Agency and the IPCC, which both basically say that we really can't wait any longer, or we are going to be facing some pretty dramatic events already, but we don't want them to get really scary bad. We need to act, and so that's the initial driver. Then what drives companies individually tends to be carbon pricing or sort of like incentive schemes. Now, what that means is literally just companies are being financially, let's go with, punished or rewarded for cleaning up their energy or their chemical structures, and hydrogen is just a great way to do that in general. Now, in Singapore specifically, there's not really a lot of incentives in terms of government incentives to switch to hydrogen, but the world being disconnected, there's incentives everywhere, and companies, and I'm sure that applies to Keppel as much as for everybody else, companies tend to have their own internal targets for the price of a ton of CO2. So that means, let's imagine we're Exxon, let's go with Total, a better example. Total will say, hey, every time we release a ton of CO2, we estimate that, it's worth about $20 or whatever that number is. And so, if we have a hydrogen solution that's $10 cheaper, that's $10 more expensive, but it releases no CO2. If we have a solution that releases a ton of CO2, that's we consider to be $20 more, so we should switch to hydrogen. So there's internal pricing structures that help guide companies towards hydrogen. There's external government regulation and the switch. And whenever the equilibrium of that value changes, there's an incentive to change technology to a hydrogen structure, and typically that's where we find success with our clients when they have made that decision.
Interesting. And Andre, you mentioned a bit about the price of carbon or CO2, right? Do you then see that being one of the enablers to push for more adoption of hydrogen in the decarbonization efforts?
Yeah. I think it's a pretty unambiguous thing we have to do. Now, there's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of different structures. There's tax credits, which, reduces tax load on companies. That's what governments can do. That's what the US is doing. There's carbon taxes, which make companies pay and essentially punish them for polluting. There's carbon markets, which have a more complicated system of allocation of CO2 that you can emit. And if you go beyond it, you have to buy allocations from a market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, look, it is, and it always be, well, maybe not always, but it is, and it will be for quite a long time, cheaper to burn natural gas, cheaper to use what we've been using. But that's because we've been getting not a free ride, but a fake free ride, in that we haven't been sort of like really costing the CO2 emissions from a society standpoint. But yeah, we're going to have to switch to a system like this. Now, it's not easy politically to do, because it's kind of just telling everybody, hey, you've been getting it extra for free, all this energy, all this stuff, when we've all been paying for it. We pay for gasoline, we pay for electricity. And we're like, hey, actually, it is actually more expensive than that. You've just been getting it semi for free, but now the climate is paying the price, and it's going to come back to us anyway. So we need to just kind of raise the prices for everybody. And politically, it's very difficult to do. So we kind of have to do it gradually. We have to do it in a smart way where the cost is managed in a better way. And we have to invent new technology to lower and lower and lower that cost to switch to hydrogen at the same time.
Right. Thank you for your inputs. And I think, Miguel, if you could also share a bit about, your experience with some of the members of the association. What are driving this interest?
So one of the beauty of an association is that we have a very diverse pool of people, pool of individuals and companies. Well, currently we have only individuals, but they are working for corporates. That will change shortly. We will have 2 types of memberships. But beyond that, at least you can see different approaches or different angles. And all of them, they see that, of course, as you were mentioning before, there is decarbonization. I mean, the world is coming to a point of no return. So they are becoming aware and they want to move into the right direction. Second, as again, it has been mentioned, there's also some targets that now they're adopting regulations. And of course, companies, and I will say companies, industry players, and not only industry players, but mostly industry players, they say, well, when there is a change, there is an opportunity. So there are many of them looking at from the commercial perspective as an opportunity. While you do good for the environment, they're also looking to the finances. We all know that currently green hydrogen is more expensive because of the capex of the equipment, and also because the capex and the opex. But it's true that based on the different reports and all of them, they converge that there will be a decrease, or there will be a reduction of costs along the years. Technology reduction of the technology will be more efficient. The usage of new technologies will make also to reduce the capex. The opex will be reduced. The electricity price is going down in case of electrolysis. So at the end of the day, when and I'm talking about electrolysis, but something similar, you can think about gas to gas, not only power to gas. But at the end of the day, it will come to a point, and of course, different reports with different backgrounds, they say, something between 2030 onwards, it may become, depending on the location where you are generating the hydrogen, it may be more maybe competitive, and even a certain point competitive with the current fuel that we are using today. Now, of course, for that to happen, the electricity price has to go down. And someone was mentioning now in the chat that we can talk later, but of course, one of the key things here is regarding to transportation, to the logistics. Currently, the technologies are not there. And if they're in a form that probably are not the most efficient, because you need to transform the hydrogen from their original state to another state and change it again. And there is a loss of efficiency, and also there is a cost behind. Now, say all of that, in Singapore, we see that there are many companies focus on applications, also in R&D, membranes, catalysts, and the like. But for example, it's interesting. So far, there are many companies focused on applications, which I understand, for example, in the coming from Dennis, for example, because for them, they have to really decarbonize because they have a high footprint, okay? But it's interesting that not many companies in Singapore are focused as a whole currently as an electrolyzer producer. I know that there are some companies starting now, that they're already at a certain stage, but only at the very earliest stage. Now, again, when you talk to the government, or you talk to industry players, startups, investors, there are so many players with many different angles, with many different questions. And that is also something that when it comes to the financing of a project, doesn't matter if it's from the application side or the generation side, it's something that increases the cost. Now, once it's understood by the investors, by the industry, how it works and how to mitigate the risks, then all of this together will make that reduce the cost and will make it more affordable, becoming a snowball in terms of reducing the price, becoming more affordable, increased volume, so on, so on, so on.
Thank you, Miguel. Since you mentioned, about the production and electrolyzer, we have a question from the audience here today, and I think I see that Andres is also trying to type an answer, because there's a question to the panel, asking us about the role of nuclear in generating green hydrogen. specifically on the molten salt small nuclear reactors that are developed by Bill Gates, TerraPower, Seabrook, and others. Opening the floor to our panelists who wants to.
I was literally typing the answer to that.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, Klaus. I actually know Klaus who asked the question. Yeah. It's been a minute. So look, the next generation. There's multiple next generation nuclear power being developed. Bill Gates is famously very involved in investing in that. I'm French, where we're the most nuclear powered country in the world. And I'm a very big fan of nuclear power. It would do so much good for the world in terms of, or at least that's my opinion. But I think the problem with nuclear is actually not so much, I mean, there's some economics problem today, and the next generation promises to help that significantly by reducing the safety requirements. I know what he's talking about in terms of molten salt. Whenever you've had problems at Fukushima or at Chernobyl, the problems were always actually not so much with the nuclear portion, but it was a failure of the water pressure, which caused a sort of water pressure explosion, which then dispersed nuclear material all over the place. And these next generation systems of nuclear don't actually use water pressure, use molten salt. If there's a failure of some kind, it actually can't explode. It's totally different technology. So that would create safe, massive power that you can then use hydrogen to transport that energy over to society. And that value proposition is excellent. I'm entirely behind it. I think fundamentally what decides whether that or not will become a sustainable way of making hydrogen is not, unfortunately, the technology, but it's a political problem. It's a problem of, would you be okay, even if we told you it's completely safe, having a nuclear power plant on Jurong Island? Like, I would, because I'm a super geek about this stuff, but unfortunately, you still have a massive problem of people that would be like, I don't want this stuff anywhere near me, even if you tell me that it's safe. Nuclear has got this political problem because it's large setups. There's talks of having small setups as well. There's a lot of potential there. I want it to be true, but I think the problem is actually much less with, I think they're trying to solve a political problem and a human problem with a technology problem. But I think it would be a fantastic solution to generate hydrogen as a carrier for that massive energy they could create.
Thank you, Andre. Any other inputs on use of nuclear?
Yeah, personally, I'm totally aligned with that. Nuclear technology is something that is very mature, that I think people can do it very safely, but it's all in the perception of the people. I know they don't want this in my backyard at the end of the day. And of course, from the political perspective, your neighbor might not like the idea of you putting a nuclear power plant here, for example, in Singapore. So this is very challenging. But having said that, in terms of safety, I think in terms of number of deaths, okay, based on the kind of fuel that we consume to generate power and so forth, I think nuclear is one of the lowest when you compare that to gas-fired power plant or even coal-fired power plant for that matter. So in fact, I think the nuclear power, especially with this small modular reactor now that's being worked on, I think that's, in time to come, this will meet Singapore's need, all right, for clean energy.
Yeah. Personally, I'm quite excited about that development as well. Thank you for that inputs on I think the use of other alternatives to generate green hydrogen. I think our panelists addressed a bit about use cases, and I think I want to move on next to talk about use cases in Singapore. I think in June this year, a report from a study commissioned by the National Climate Change Secretariat, the NCCS, EDB, and EMA, to look at the long-term feasibility of low-carbon hydrogen for emission reduction in Singapore was released. And in this report, a few potential use cases across different industries were featured. So I would like to get the view of our panelists here today from your perspective. Which are the more promising use cases, where low-carbon hydrogen could really play a part in our decarbonization efforts? I think, Denise, you mentioned a bit about, in the use from data centers perspective. Beyond that, just curious to hear from our panelists again, which are the more closer to market applications that we should start looking at.
Okay, for hydrogen, besides power generation, there there are other functions like mobility and so forth. But from what we are doing here, I mean, we do a assessment within CAPA as well. Okay, I think there are other areas which hydrogen can be applied. All right, so green hydrogen can also be, to be honest with you, to be blended with natural gas, so that natural gas combusts with less less pollutants like CO2 being emitted. So this is something that's being worked on by a number of our gencos in Singapore. They're exploring this option now. This is one, and of course the other area that we strongly believe in is the production of town gas. So town gas, basically delivers gas to, I think, almost every homes here in Singapore. So how to make it greener? That's when we are looking at the possibility of injecting green hydrogen into it. All right. At the same time, if we can do recycle CO2 capture from the air, for example, to be blended in as well, so that will give us a net zero position. So for us, these are some of the possible applications. And then likewise on Jurong Island, I think there's a huge demand for H2 as well at this point in time, pretty much on grey H2. If you have the ability to deliver green H2, I think companies will seriously consider that option.
Right.
Yeah, I will say that actually in the report, and I believe that the roadmap of the government, they have actually main 5 pillars. One of them is the power generation that is just mentioned. The other one is non-industrial gas that includes town gas and LPG for cooking, for example. Industrial and manufacturing, I don't remember what is the percentage, but the consumption of hydrogen in Singapore is mostly driven by refining. Then of course mobility, and then maritime and ports. There's also one that is I don't know where it falls, but it's actually aviation. Europe actually is really really working in that direction. We can see Airbus really focus into that, Boeing not so much. But it's also something that, given that Singapore is a hub for aviation, eventually is something that will also come into play, right? But of course, here in Singapore, given the high density population that we have in Singapore, some of them are easier to implement than others. So, for example, power generation is easy. Basically, it's an industrial area that is actually, is not for civilians. It's just for industrial area, right? But when it comes, for example, for other things like mobility, even when it's a great fuel, the problem that it has is that, as someone was mentioning in the chat, it has some limitations, or at least has certain concerns, okay, on the safety matter. Doesn't mean that it's less safe than, for example, natural gas that has been used for many years, the hydrogen, the same as natural gas, but people are not aware what is the safety matters, how it actually performs. So when it comes to the approvals to drive a hydrogen car in Singapore, you need to go through a new element of that is a new fuel, has to be approved under certain standards, policies, regulations, and all of that is actually is being pushed already, but actually that will take some time. So some things among all these 5 pillars, actually all of them are being addressed, but some of them will be faster to implement than others.
Right.
I'm pretty active on this question, which is, Singapore existing use of hydrogen. I guess I've never put it this way before, but Singapore is actually probably one of the, if not the biggest hydrogen generator in the world today per capita. But it's because of the massive refineries at Jurong Island. The thing is that none of it is clean today, right? So decarbonizing that value chain, to make it very simple, we use hydrogen to refine crude oil to make gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, whatever, tanker fuel, everything. You use hydrogen today to do it, but you use gray hydrogen made from natural gas that's very polluting. So just decarbonizing that, either using other sources of hydrogen or just capturing the CO2 that's made from that, it's not an easy thing, but that is really a principal vector for just cleaning up the hydrogen ecosystem and using more hydrogen in Singapore.
Just one comment on the top. There is actually a chart, I don't know in which report, that basically shows the highest emissions, CO2 emissions in Singapore. And you see that there is small circles everywhere, not everywhere, in some areas, and then you see the one in Jurong.
Yeah.
So it's actually very clear that, for example, if Jurong in the refinery, it was used green hydrogen just straight, it will be able to reduce the carbon footprint. However, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that it's generated currently the hydrogen while it's used. Now, if you import green hydrogen, that means that you need to store somewhere that hydrogen, and that is something that brings additional infrastructure matters that have to be addressed. So the idea is good, but and it's possible. The question is, how is the way to proceed? And yeah, so I think that is very interesting what you, Andres, had said, but actually it's not an easy implementation as far as I know.
Yes, Miguel, you're absolutely correct. So this is an area of interest for Keppel. We are an engineering solutions company, so we are working very closely with our partners now to develop to look into the conceptual design and so forth of a liquid hydrogen import terminal here in Singapore, and that would include storage facilities as well as regasification facilities. So it's a very interesting journey, full of challenges. Okay, and we also be mindful of the cost that's going to be involved, right? So, but having said that, we are continuing this journey because we truly believe that green hydrogen must land in Singapore in time to come, right? For this new economy to succeed, all right? We can't just continue to burn hydrocarbons for our energy needs.
Thank you for that input. I think this really bring me to the next so-called aspects of hydrogen supply chain that I wanted to talk about, which is the logistical aspects, right? Miguel, you started talking a bit about it. Dennis, you mentioned about liquid hydrogen. So, we have covered a bit about the sources, the production, where could hydrogen potentially be coming from, and some of the potential use cases within Singapore. It'll be interesting to next, look at what are some of the logistical aspects of the supply chain that is needed, right, here in Singapore to bring hydrogen from the source of production to the point of use. Dennis, if you would like to start, considering your projects in Keppel.
So I think to start off with, you need to look at what's available upstream. Okay, namely the hydrogen producer side of things. So with the assumption that, of course, the kind of volume, the kind of tonnage we're looking at is something that can be delivered by the time 2025, 26 kind of timeline. So with the kind of volume, how then can that be exported, say, for example, to Singapore? Okay, so one good means of transporting hydrogen is to liquefy it. Okay, this is one option. We call this liquid hydrogen. But such technology is quite mind-boggling at this point in time. But having said that, these are challenges which we are working very closely with our partners to resolve. So liquefaction plant is one. All right. Then the export terminal in Australia is able to, to sort of transfer this liquid hydrogen from the shore, okay, from the wharf to a vessel is also another challenge that we are working on now. So then the other part of the equation, the liquid hydrogen vessels. So this is also another challenge that we are working on. None exists commercially in the world as of today. All right, such a vessel, namely because of the cryogenic temperature we're talking about, because liquid hydrogen is at -253 degrees Celsius. So it's quite challenging to handle. But our partners, whom which we work with very closely, like I mentioned, Kawasaki Heavy Industry, Linde, and so forth, we have got a possible solution to address this. All right. So now with the liquid hydrogen vessel, for example, okay, after loading it in Australia, then that's when we sail it to Singapore, and then there are a lot of also engineering challenge along the way, like things like boil-off gas and stuff like that. So that has to be addressed and so forth. So when you arrive in Singapore, then that's where the real challenge is also. Namely, you got to offload the liquid hydrogen. At the same time, you need to regas the hydrogen, the liquid hydrogen to gaseous form before it goes into the power plant. All this requires a lot of how should I say it, approvals from authorities. So we need to work with authorities closely with regards to how to import hydrogen and how to handle it safely and how to use it for combustion. Even the route of how this LH2 vessel enters Singapore, we need to work very closely with the marine port authorities as well. So a lot of challenges, All right, but I think it's a worthwhile exercise that we're working on. I think the end game is that as long as we can work out a solution, to decarbonize our journey. All right, I think it's a worthwhile effort altogether.
Thank you, Dennis. I think in this case, beyond just the physical infrastructure, what would be the other enablers that our panelists here today would think that needs to be in place, for hydrogen to be adopted, more commercially? I'll probably open the floor to Andre and Miguel.
I think what we can do as a private commercial entity is so much, okay, in terms of anything that's engineering related. I think we can probably come up with a solution, but again, we also understand that there are challenges and constraints from the policy standpoint of it, because Singapore is really congested and very small, so we have to be very mindful of that. So again, so we really need to work very closely hand in hand with the agencies. Okay, be it Singapore Civil Defence Force or Energy Market Authority, even Jurong Town Corporation, so forth. We have to work very closely together to enable this new field, to enter Singapore safely and converting it to green electrons. Okay, so we need to work hand in hand with agencies on this.
So wait, the question is, what can private companies already do today on hydrogen?
Yeah, the question is to identify, what are the so-called supply chain considerations from end to end. I think Denise shared a bit about the physical infrastructure. Just curious to understand from the panelists, beyond physical infrastructure, is there anything else that you foresee needs to be in place today to drive adoption? Is it regulation?
Yeah. So I mean, regulation. I think regulation will be the biggest driver. Just because every company out there is constantly doing cost-benefit analysis of using renewable energy, using hydrogen, using cleaner sources of fuel, and part of that equation, they look at, do we need new cost infrastructure? And when the answer is yes, they go, okay, how much does it cost? How do we distribute the cost? And it factors it in. But much like new technology is constantly trying to reduce the cost. If you build infrastructure, it's a cost now, but it reduces the cost in the future. You got to increase the cost of the alternative, which is increasing the cost of CO2 or pollutants in general. And we need both. One is reducing the cost of what we want to switch to, and one is increasing the cost of what we don't want. It's important for what companies can do beyond pressuring the establishment to listen to this and echo what the climate scientists are saying, is being aware. So this is credit to Keppel and to Dennis to being so actively involved on switching to green energy and hydrogen for such large projects, but they have Dennis, who is an expert on this topic, who knows about much more than he's going to have time to let on this panel, but he knows about the entire infrastructure, the requirements, the problems in Singapore with his specific industry. Nobody's going to be able to tell you exactly how renewable energy or hydrogen is going to play with your specific industry or corporate profile, etc. So having in-house experts that know the pace of each aspect of technology, transport is something that still has a lot of question versus generation. We can predict pretty well what the cost of generation is going to be. So having people on your team, getting educated, understanding where the technology is at each part of the value chain is something that you can do today. And helping acquiring early technologies, be early movers on, Keppel being clearly an early mover in supporting import and transportation of hydrogen is what one can do today, beyond pressuring government.
I believe that one of the key questions here is that there are several technologies. Now, what is very difficult is to have all technologies at the same time.
Yep.
One terminal for ammonia, one terminal for liquid hydrogen, one terminal for you name it, the point is eventually that is not possible. I mean, first space, second investment, right? Now, of course, to align not only the industry players, but as well, what is because at the end of the day, it's not the industry players from Singapore. Is okay, if you're importing from Australia, let's put as an example, Dennis was mentioning, you need to be aligned with Australia that whatever they're using is compatible with what you have. Now, so there is, I think, a lack of convention of, let's try to go in one another direction. Now, of course, you look to that, and not every technology suits to everyone, or one single carrier will satisfy everyone. Second, their political, their economical or financial interest behind. So at the end of the day, I think that is one of the things that if you bring, and again, if you look to the report that was mentioned or shared some days ago, actually there are many potential how they say, suppliers, countries that they can supply. Now, each country actually, they're pushing for one technology or another. Now, for Singapore, as a potential hub where we want to be able to deliver as well as service as a hub in Southeast Asia, it's going to be a kind of challenging to be able to satisfy everyone technologically, to be in a certain timeline, also financially. It may happen, yes, may happen, but that will take time, and it definitely is not only about money, but also about regulations that need to be agreed by, a long procedure, especially if you work with safety matters. Usually takes a long time. So I think that is not so easy answer to reply about logistics.
Since you mentioned about timeline, so we are under tremendous pressure, especially from data center industries. Namely because our clients are looking at, for example, Amazon wanting, they openly declare they want to go carbon neutral by 2030. All right, 10 years from now. In fact, coming to 9 years from now. All right, Microsoft going carbon negative by 2030. All right, and then last but not least, Google also made an announcement wanting to go fossil fuel free by 2030. So these are the companies that invested heavily into Singapore. So for them to continue to grow and scale in Singapore, I think we have to meet their ambition as well. All right. So if we continue at the current pace by looking at leveraging on hydrocarbons, it's not going to work for us. Okay, it's very challenging. Not just the pressure from let's say at a nation level, the carbon tax kicking in and so forth. That aside, but from clients, the paymasters. All right, the investors into Singapore, they are the one that openly declare they need this, they need a solution. So yeah, so that the challenge is now on to find something that really meets their requirements, so that they can continue to to scale and invest into Singapore.
Thank you, Denise. Just curious on your point. Given that you mentioned about the project having to also having considered the requirements from your customers on end-to-end of the supply chain, are some of these so-called solutions, I understand the cost of green hydrogen is still on the high side. How commercially viable are some of these solutions today?
Okay, so what we are doing is that we don't just look into the logistics side of things, the supply chain infrastructure. We are also going upstream, to work with hydrogen producers to see where are the areas we can come in to lower the cost. At this point in time, if you look at the entire H2 cost and so forth, the levelized cost of hydrogen, for us, we know that the bulk of it, the cost is actually in the upstream hydrogen production side, because renewable energy in Australia, all right, as of now, it's still on the very high side. I think in time to come, by 2025, with the kind of massive investment going on in Australia, we do expect the renewable energy cost to come down. So with that coming down, I think we have a shot at having the levelized cost of hydrogen in Singapore by 2027 or 28 timeline to be at, I wouldn't say at a really low level, but at an acceptable level that can meet our clients' requirement.
Right. Thank you. And I think just a quick pause here to answer some of the questions that our audience here have. I think there are several questions pertaining to price. And I think we won't use this panel to talk about the detail of the numbers, but I would like to maybe bring you to again the report published by NCCS, EDB, and EMA. I think you can do a quick Google on the study, the hydrogen study report. It's interesting to see that they have done quite a bit of study on the break-even cost. So feel free to take a look at that document to get a view on that. And coming back to the panel, I would like to, I think, Andre, I just wanted to get your point on, technology and innovation as a startup, right? That there are progressively more companies or startups trying to, come into the hydrogen economy space. Just wanted to get your views, what are some of your advice to these companies trying to develop solutions in this space? And Miguel and Denise, feel free to jump in as well if you have some advice for, startups looking into this space.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as I mentioned, there's really a lot of high velocity improvement right now. We're a super niche, super specific part of the hydrogen ecosystem as a purifying membrane of hydrogen. But you'll have everything from people that make, there's one of the questions that I just saw in the Q&A, which is there, can we name some companies in Singapore that repurpose trucks to hydrogen fuel cell and ships? I can tell you those two different technologies are two different startups because they probably wouldn't be using the same. So trucks are probably using PEM membranes versus ships. I've only ever heard of solid oxide membranes, which are two different technologies, so probably two different startups. I don't have the name of either or both of those startups. I'm not even sure they exist in Singapore. But the point is that there's a very large ecosystem from generation to separation to transport to storage to whatever it is, to use cases. Even in generation, you'll get electrolysis, which is from water and electricity. And you have new generators that are being developed by a couple startups called Plasmonics that use plasma and stuff. I'm not going to even pretend I understand. Thankfully, there's already a lot of funding and help. But we have seen I'm going to talk to a problem that's been very accurate, precise for us. Singapore regulatory ecosystem from a laboratory standpoint, from a research standpoint, is actually lagging behind a lot of people in the region. So we are getting significant. We haven't made the decisions to switch yet, but we're a Singaporean company, and we've received dramatically more help from the Australian government, which is a coordinated national hydrogen strategy, both financially and in terms of regulation, space, etc., to actually do work, research, and development and manufacture of our hydrogen-related product in Australia compared to Singapore. And we've tried. We've tried to work with EDB. We've tried to work with, well, maybe I shouldn't name specific agencies, but we've tried to work with everybody involved. And there are incentive scales. There is support, but compared to certain countries around here in the region, Japan and Australia specifically, are all in on hydrogen. They've made national commitments to that order. That Singapore is involved in this. The latest NCCS report has a really good sort of like detailed plan to talk about how they plan on importing and using Australian hydrogen. And I thought the report was really well made, and there's clearly a lot of thoughts, and it's also made by the EMA and who am I forgetting? Is it SGInnovate that I'm forgetting in there? Who was the third partner in that report? But somebody else anyway. EMA. Yeah. But anyway, the point is the government is taking it seriously, but right now the incentive structures for startups is a little bit lagging compared to other people in the space. So investing, supporting, easing the development of new technologies would help.
Thank you.
Actually, I would like to jump in here. So actually in the association, we have quite a lot of members. Some of them, as I mentioned before, are government, some other, government individuals, but they work in the government, in the investment side, in the industrial side. We also have actually several startups that actually, as any other member, come to us time to time to ask for network, for support in connection with this and that. In Singapore, there is actually several startups with very interesting technologies. One is, obviously Andre, he's here and he can make marketing of his company, but they do membranes, but they're also AEM technology in terms of electrolyzers, also their catalyzers, there's a large range in the whole value chain. I just mentioned some of them. Now, it's true that Singapore has more certain interest to support startups on hydrogen, but obviously the size, we are aware that the size of grant that you can get in other countries may be larger. But of course, it's not only about grants, it's also about what is the support that you may get in kind, I would say, rather than in cash. Okay. So anyway, if anyone is interested to know more about that, I'm happy to engage on a private conversation and try to see if we can, from the association, to support. One last thing is the association is free of charge. Just feel free to go to our website, link, click there, register, free of charge. We welcome new members anytime. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Miguel. I'll register after this.
We're a member, by the way.
Same here. Maybe allow me to just add on to this in terms of kind of support that we're looking at. All right, because of course for Kappa we work very closely with the local agencies. We keep them posted and stuff like that. All right, but like I shared across just now, so we work with a consortium of I think mainly Japanese company. So for example, I mentioned Kawasaki heavy industry as one, Mitsui OSK line as one, and then of course for the power plant side of things, I'm working very closely with Mitsubishi Heavy Industry. All right. For the hydrogen side of things, the producer side of things, I'm also working very closely with Osaka Gas, Japan. So with all this consortium of Japanese companies I'm working very closely with, I mean, I was very surprised, for example, Japan's Ministry of Trade and Industry actually reached out to us and want to render support for this Japanese consortium of companies. So they are very encouraged by what we are doing with regards to H2. So they would like to extend support, be it from financing this project to insurance and so forth, from the Japanese government to this consortium of Japanese company working with Keppel. So it's really very positive and exciting to understand that we also get support from countries like Japan. All right, who really believe in the leveraging on the what Japan companies have developed, and then to better the world in terms of reducing our carbon footprint.
Thank you so much for that sharing. This has been a very interesting and exciting conversation, and every time if I'm on a panel talking about either sustainability or decarbonization, we have an onflow of interest from passionate audience and panelists, but unfortunately due to time constraint, we are coming to the close of the event. I hope we all have got a good understanding, from this session, the role of hydrogen in the decarbonization efforts here in Singapore. I would like to wrap up today's session by posing two open questions for our panelists. I think firstly, it's really to get your view as to whether green hydrogen, whether it is the holy grail for climate change, will it solve all our climate change issues, right? I think secondly, we have established through this discussion that hydrogen, or rather green hydrogen, is important to support decarbonization efforts here in Singapore and also globally. And Singapore is currently in the very early stages to explore the use of hydrogen, right, as an alternative energy carrier. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few years. What do each of you hope to see in terms of development or advancement in the hydrogen economy in the next 3 to 5 years? So I'll open the floor.
Okay, I mean, I would like to jump in here first. I think, yes, we do believe that hydrogen is the way to go. If we are really serious about decarbonizing, not just the industries in Singapore, but also globally. Okay, we of course, other than nuclear power, right? But hydrogen is the way to go. Okay, for us. And having said that, I think what we hope for, especially for a tiny island like Singapore, okay, we need to, also advance in terms of in parallel with the kind of policies, all right, and guidelines with regards to hydrogen import and handling hydrogen. So that has to go hand in hand to expedite the whole process. So this is what I hope to see in the next few years. Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. So I think coming back to your question on to answering, I think that green hydrogen definitely it's key to close the gap to reduce the CO2 footprint, but it's just one of the many ways to go to decarbonize the society. Of course, given that Singapore depends in terms of energy from third parties, it can be gas, can be oil, it can be electricity, can be, at the end of the day, it's a solution that actually fits perfect to Singapore. As far as the technology, it's there. And of course, we do it on time, as Dennis said, because the time is ticking and there are some deadlines already set by the government.
Yeah, look, I think there's so much happening right now, and as of the last year or so, or last 2 years, investment in this space has really shifted into very high gear. So I think we'll see the returns of that and a real leap in forward technology all across the value chain in the next 3 to 5 years. That being said, it's very hard to predict where it'll work or where it won't work. For example, in steelmaking, there's maybe a large place in there for hydrogen through the direct production of iron ore, which could make a massive new use case for hydrogen. Same with biomass gasification, etc. It's all going to depend on the unit economics and how quickly the technology gets to a good point. That being said, it will have a place in the economy. There's just too much momentum. It's too much of a good option for certain use cases, and it's going to depend fundamentally on how much we price carbon and how much we see the alternatives being damaging. So, yeah, it's going to be a very gray area question. How much, where, and what will come first, but it's coming to many different industries already.
Right. Great. Thank you very much, Andre, Miguel, Denise, for this insightful sharing. I hope everyone here has gotten some good insights, about the hydrogen economy as a whole and how low carbon hydrogen can play a part to decarbonize industry in Singapore and also globally. I think we all have this common fight against the climate crisis, and I hope we all can do our part, however big or small, to decarbonize where possible before it's too late. So thank you once again, panelists, and to our audience, thank you for attending and staying till the end. I will hand over the session back to Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Hui Ying. So I would like to thank all our panelists for today, Andre, Miguel, Dennis, and Hui Ying, for sharing their valuable insight and knowledge. Unfortunately, we weren't able to cover all of your questions due to time constraints, but I would very much like to thank our audience today for engaging with us and sending in your questions. For our audience today, do also take note that we will be sending out a post-event email with all the important information you may need, including a recording for this webinar, so do keep an eye out for that. And with that, we've come to the end of our webinar today. Thank you all for spending your Wednesday afternoon with us, and on behalf of SGInnovate, I would like to wish you all a great week ahead, and we look forward to see you again at our next event. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.